The topic of discussion for today revolves around boundaries. Let's start off with the definition of boundaries. We can define boundaries as personal rules or guidelines we set to protect our emotional, mental, and physical well being. We use these guidelines to define how we want to be treated by others, how we treat ourselves, and how we interact with the world around us. The purpose of boundaries is to serve as a framework to protect the main three critical pillars: emotional, mental, and physical well being. Boundaries can also be viewed as a set of rules we establish for our own behavior and the behavior we accept from others. They communicate our needs, values, and limits clearly and effectively. By setting boundaries, we can create a sense of safety, respect, and mutual understanding in various areas of our life. I want to talk about the six pillars of boundaries. The first one is physical boundaries. It defines personal physical space and physical touch preferences. For example, maybe on a first date, you prefer a handshake rather than a hug. The second is emotional boundaries, protecting your feelings and emotional energy. An example could be, I can't talk about this subject right now. I need some time to process. Third is time boundaries, protecting how you use your time and energy, managing your time, and disconnecting after hours. An example of this could be, I can only stay for an hour because I have other commitments. Fourth, you have mental boundaries, respecting personal beliefs, thoughts, and opinions. An example of this could be, I appreciate your perspective, but I have a different opinion. Number five would be material boundaries. Sets limits on what you're willing to share and give. For example, this could be money or possessions. I can lend you this book, I can lend you $2,000, but I'm gonna need it back by a certain time, a certain date. And finally, relationship boundaries, defining expectations and behaviors in a relationship. A good example of this would be, I need honesty and open communication to feel secure. Another way to look at boundaries is that boundaries could be viewed as a form of self-care. I published an episode a couple years ago titled Self-Care is a State of Being. It was a great episode because my guest did such an amazing job discussing the importance of self-care and how it should be part of our daily routine. And in the same way, I can say that boundaries help create healthier lifestyles by setting clear expectations. Setting boundaries is a way to protect one's time, energy, and peace of mind. So I want to give examples of healthy and unhealthy boundaries. So I'm going to start with physical boundaries. A good example or a healthy example of physical boundaries would be clearly communicating comfort levels with physical touch, respecting one's need for personal space without taking offense. The unhealthy version of this would be feeling obligated to all physical affection even when you're uncomfortable, or ignoring someone's request for personal space and invading it without permission. Emotional boundaries. A healthy version of emotional boundaries could be taking time to process your emotions and expressing them constructively, and acknowledging others' feelings but not taking responsibility for them. Unhealthy version of emotional boundaries: suppressing your emotions to avoid conflict, allowing others to dictate how you feel or how you should handle your emotions. Number three, time boundaries. Blocking time on your schedule for self-care, family, or hobbies. Politely declining requests that don't align with your priorities. Setting limits on work hours and sticking to them. The unhealthy version of time boundaries: saying yes to every request, allowing interruptions during your personal downtime. So the next three aren't part of the six pillars that I spoke about earlier, work boundaries, social boundaries, and digital boundaries. So, healthy work boundaries, communicating when you're not available outside of work hours, delegating tasks when your workload becomes unmanageable, unhealthy version of work boundaries, answering emails or messages at all hours of the day, even during family time, taking on extra responsibilities, even when you're overwhelmed. Number 5, social boundaries. Choosing how much time you spend with family and friends based on your comfort and energy levels. Expressing your preferences, saying no to events or social activities that make you uncomfortable. Unhealthy version of social boundaries. Feeling pressure to attend every gathering, even when you're exhausted. Allowing others to pressure you into behaviors that go against your values. This one right here is when you're realizing friends don't match the person that you're trying to become, and feeling guilty for needing alone time. And lastly, I want to talk about digital boundaries. Limiting your screen time or social media use to avoid burnout, muting or unfollowing accounts that negatively affect your mental health. You know, one thing I want you guys to think about as you're listening to this episode, how many of these healthy or unhealthy versions are you actually practicing? How many of them are you pursuing or actively trying to implement into your life? How many of these boundaries do you need to reinforce? Let's cover the last part of digital boundaries, which is unhealthy versions of it. Feeling pressure to respond immediately to every message or email. Oversharing details about your life on social media for validation. The purpose of me going through these different pillars of healthy versus unhealthy boundaries is when you recognize these examples, you can better understand where your boundaries are and where you might need to reinforce. So now let's talk about creating boundaries, establishing boundaries. The first step to creating and establishing boundaries is self-reflection. You want to know your limits and your values. Understanding the depths of your limits is super critical. You might end up pushing yourself to the edge of your tolerance level and not know how or when to take a step back. When you understand your limits, you have an understanding for where you are within your current circumstance, within your surroundings. Once you reach that level of tolerance where you can no longer take any more, you can truly assess and reflect on whether or not you are strong enough to continue moving forward, or you just simply need to take a break and restart. As you reflect on your circumstance, you can confirm if your circumstance aligns with your values and your beliefs. Number 2, clarity. You want to be clear and concise when communicating your boundaries. There's no need to sugarcoat. There's no need to tiptoe around your boundaries. Be very clear about how you feel, why you feel this way, and what it means for you to maintain such boundaries. You will come across individuals who will challenge your need and your purpose for having those type of boundaries in order to further their own agenda. My advice to you, don't let them trick you out that spot. Okay, number 3, practice enforcing them regularly. The second you let up on these boundaries you hold dear is the moment you will begin to question the purpose you created them in the first place. It will become difficult to manage boundaries when you're out here flip-flopping like sandals, trying to determine whether or not you need to keep them or let them go. Now, it's a given that certain individuals will get the pass. However, you need to be firm on those distinctions in order to eliminate any ambiguity and any opportunities for any other individual to manipulate you to giving them a pass as well. That is a gem. Number 4, flexibility. You need to adapt as your needs evolve. I like this one because it could be confusing. I love the fact that it's confusing. Because the term flexibility does not mean you are adjusting to allow others to bypass your boundaries. The key is to adapt as your needs evolve, not the needs of others. I want to share a few gems on communicating boundaries effectively when you're looking to establish them. So, the first way is to use I statements. I need time to recharge. I would like some time to rethink this arrangement. The second key is to stay calm and assertive. And thirdly, you want to practice saying no. And for those who struggle with this, I published an episode titled How to Say No After Saying Yes. And if you're truly struggling with establishing boundaries, try role playing scenarios of boundary setting conversations. And now I want to talk about the essential part of boundaries, the benefits of setting boundaries. Number one, they can help maintain healthy relationships. Number two, they can prevent burnout and resentment. And number three, they promote self-respect and confidence. The key to standing firm on your boundaries is to understand how to handle pushback and how to reassess boundaries if they are repeatedly violated. Now, I want to emphasize that setting boundaries is not an easy task. It can be difficult, especially if you are surrounded by individuals who have heavy influence in your life, or if you're just not used to being vocal or assertive. So I want to share some motivational quotes and some affirmations that can help those individuals who are struggling with setting clear boundaries, being consistent with those boundaries, and making sure that people do not cross those boundaries. The first one is by Brene Brown. Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. The next one is by Ann Taylor. You teach people how to treat you by deciding what you will and what you won't accept. Listen, if you don't want to set boundaries, you're basically giving people the green light to play in your face. Okay? The next one is by Anne Lamott. No is a complete sentence, period. And the last one I want to share with you guys is from Nidra Glover Tawwab. Boundaries are not about keeping people out, but about showing people where the door is. In conclusion, we talked about the process of creating boundaries, establishing boundaries, and being firm on your boundaries. So those of you who are listening, I also want to encourage you guys to take action and reflect on at least one of these boundaries and focus on the key points that I talked about and how you can apply it and or where you need to reinforce the boundaries that already exist. And one of the main things you want to keep in mind is after you create and establish these boundaries, you're going to deal with resistance, which is normal. People are going to challenge you. They want to know, are you really about that life? And if you find yourself on the edge of questioning why those boundaries exist in the first place, you want to think about the benefits. They help maintain healthy relationships, prevent burnout and resentment, and they also promote self-respect and confidence. There are going to be consequences if you're not assertive when it comes to your boundaries. And these consequences could leave you feeling overwhelmed and individuals in your life taking advantage of you. Reaffirming your boundaries will aid in your practice of self-respect and self-care. So, I'm going to close out with some affirmations. Number one, I deserve relationships that honor and respect my boundaries. Every time I say no to something that doesn't serve me, I am saying yes to my well-being. I have the right to protect my energy and prioritize my needs. It's okay to disappoint others to stay true to myself. My boundaries are a reflection of my self-worth and self-respect. I trust myself to enforce my boundaries with confidence and compassion. So there you have it. Standing on business, the power of boundaries. I am your host, Till next time, Naum.